Hi everybody, David Nour on behalf of Jennifer Bridges and PDUs to Go. I want to welcome you back to another PDUs to Go PM Next session. This is going to be a unique one where we have two guests from the same company. I think they bring a really unique and complementary perspectives to this topic. So joining me are Jason Westland and Stephanie Ray from projectmanager.com. Jason and Steph, welcome.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks, David. Nice to meet you.
Happy to be here.
And you'll have to excuse my strong New Zealand accent.
That's
Stephanie, this will be more pleasing to the ear.
There you go.
I can translate for the other Americans.
Our audience who doesn't speak from that part of the world. Here's Stephanie. Great to have you both. So Jason, let me start with you. For those who may not know as much about you or projectmanager.com, can you spend a couple minutes talk about your background and kind of how did you end up here? And then we'll jump to Steph and ask her to do the same.
Sure. So someone asked me when I was about 10, what did you want to be? And I said, a manager. My son's 10 now. I think if he answered that same question the same way, he wouldn't have a clue what a manager was. All I knew was that the manager was the one that delegated the work, and that sounded pretty cool because my father was a builder and he had me digging holes in the construction site. So the manager was what I wanted to be. And so, when I started my career, I majored in project management at university and then just started managing projects. But in those days, this was sort of, 15, 20 years ago now, a small project then, which is what I started on, was around 2 million. And the projects just got larger and larger. And then, 15 years later, I was managing a sort of £2 billion change program for British Rail and still pretty young and, having fun doing it. But the main issue that I experienced as a project manager was I couldn't tell at a glance, were my projects on time or not? And so you had to use, complex tools and spreadsheets and all that to work it out, daily stand-ups and everything. And so to solve that problem, I created projectmanager.com. And the theory was that managers would be planning projects, team members would be there updating the status of tasks, their project plans would be updated automatically, and then that project manager could see at a glance on their dashboard, are they on time? And so, we've kind of been in project management software world since.
That's fabulous. Steph, your background.
Sure. So I have a kind of unique background in content launches. I've launched a lot of things, magazines, if you can remember those back in the day. And then I transitioned into online and then tablets when tablets were coming out. So I had this unique experience to be able to launch a lot of different new products in the content space, and connected with Jason about 5.5 years ago. He was just new in the US, looking to scale our marketing and sales operations. And he was looking to scale the content product essentially, because he had already built a really phenomenally large audience through email and through LinkedIn of project management pros. And it was such an exciting opportunity to have a ready built audience. When you launch things, you don't have people waiting. So I thought, this would be really great. So I started on the content side. But my background in product for mobile and software started to kind of chip in at me, and eventually I migrated my way up to being VP of product marketing, because I obviously learned the product pretty well, and then VP of product for about 2 years now. So Jason and I collaborate on the strategy, on the new market offerings that we're looking to roll out, and work with a small collaborative team to deliver software to project managers around the world.
So Steph, let me build on that and ask you, with COVID, and I'm going to jump to Jason in a second about what you guys are seeing in the market, but one of the things that's very apparent is that COVID has exacerbated, if not elevated, the use of platforms and digital tools. And I'm not sure most of us knew Zoom or were using Miro or Mural or any of these tools way before all this. Share with us, if you could, just 3 quick attributes that set projectmanager.com aside from other project management functional platforms that are out there for us.
Sure, and it's interesting that you say that, because project management, as Jason alluded to, has changed a lot over the years. So what people consider project management tools today are different from what it was 5-10 years ago. where it was very formal, Waterfall, MS Project, et cetera. So now when people search for project management tools, they're looking for Slack or collaboration or even Google Docs, right? So what sets us apart in a broadening market is our ability to deliver both the time and resource management features, as well as the dashboard that Jason mentioned for managing your projects, while also having those collaboration tools that teams need to get the work done. And our tool gives people the visibility kind of through and through from the team's work, the hours, the timesheets. So we have found a lot of customers have been coming to us as they want to mature up from lighter weight project management tools like Excel, because they need that visibility into what the teams are working on, and they need the ability to collaborate around a task or a project.
That's fabulous. So Jason, obviously the focus of this session, we're going to talk a lot about waterfall versus agile methodologies, but talk a second about what are you seeing in this global pandemic? Obviously, we're beyond the initial shock of the February, March timeframe.
Yep.
We've had now 5, plus months of this under our belt. Talk a little about what you're seeing out there in the project management space as a result of COVID-19.
Sure. So, it all turned to crap really on my birthday, which was the 2nd of March. It's an easy day for everyone on this call to remember, just in case. So that was the week, that COVID search terms took off, and Google Search Console. You can see the stock market, plummet. It all really turned to custard. And the first thing was that the US and the world went into lockdown. The result from a project management perspective, of course, was that many projects were just immediately put on pause as everyone kind of went into that shock. So after that, we've noticed that there are really 2 camps of types of projects. So the first is you've got projects that are in industries where those staff members just really couldn't work in any capacity. So like construction, manufacturing, engineering, those were kind of shut down. But what's happened since particularly the US has started opening up again, is that we're seeing that those projects are being downsized dramatically. So the projects are being finished out, and the new projects that are coming in either aren't commencing because they don't have the cash, or there's just not the confidence to be able to kick those projects off, or as importantly, they're being, budgets are being reduced, scopes being reduced. So we're seeing a smaller volume of projects and a smaller size of project in those industries. And it's not just, you can imagine construction, that kind of makes sense, but it's lots of other affected industries, like procurement, as an example, is affected. Events is one that I hadn't expected, but of course, people can't physically meet if you're in marketing events. So marketing now is split, where you've got the events teams that are being heavily impacted, and the campaign teams and the paid advertising teams that are skyrocketing. So, and travel took a downturn, etc. So that's the first type of industry, was those that really couldn't work in any capacity. The second type then was those that were able to work but ended up working from home. And IT, software development, marketing teams, professional services teams. So those types of projects have been more active than ever before. And the reason is that if you're in a work from home model, then efficiency is quite important, right? And to get more efficient, typically you need a bit more structure. And in adding more structure and all of this kind of change being imposed on teams, well, typically, the more change, the more projects that there are. And so in those worlds, we're seeing a huge amount of project activity taking place. But rather than these big change programs, like a big IT rollout, or a big professional services initiative, they're just being broken down into a myriad of lots of smaller initiatives. And that's where we are noticing also then the management styles and the methodologies being used are changing a lot, that I can talk about at some stage.
Yeah, I want to come back to the management style methodologies. Steph, how about you? What are you seeing in the market? What's kind of getting your attention and the attention of maybe clients you're interacting with?
Sure. So we heard initially from one of our larger clients that said, "Oh my gosh, thank goodness, we had this because we were able to quickly transition all the teams that weren't, already plugged into the project management software, who suddenly were working from home. They were able to, bring them all in and immediately be able to transition to work from home because, for example, the tool had, like I mentioned, some of those time tracking or resource management features, right? So that was, I think what we've seen with some of our larger companies where they pretty well, connected these teams, the tool with larger project teams, PMOs. Well, they were able to say, oh, let's just extend that out. So we are seeing that. We're also seeing some larger industries that Jason's mentioned, like in some of the IT or software companies who are having to ramp and scale to support larger volumes of people working from home. They're adopting as well. But, I think we're not, it's still the beginning. I think we're still, probably looking at a 1 to 2 year transition to working from home consistently. And I think a lot of teams are still sort of scrambling and struggling with, well, how do we measure what is efficient? How are we looking at productivity? How can we make sure people are actually collaborating? And how can we see that? How do we see the results of that? So those are some of the questions I think that are still, a lot of teams are probably wondering about.
You both are dead on. I want to echo that I'm having a lot of conversation with executives around what I call sector variance. So to build on Jason's comment, some industry sectors we've seen just get hammered. You talk about travel, you talk about tourism, you talk about events. I jokingly told somebody else the other day, back in the good old days of February 2020, when we used to fly, right, and go to events, go to conferences, those things, I haven't been on a plane in 5-6 months, right? So yep. Those are certainly gotten hit. By the same token, I have clients that are in IT infrastructure, or I've got clients that are in certain parts of manufacturing that, healthcare services that are actually doing well. They're doing some really interesting work. So that's fascinating to hear. So Jason, tell me, I know a lot of our project management professionals know this, get this, but talk to me about what Waterfall methodology really is. And what does it consist of? What does it comprise of?
Sure. So, most will have been taught this kind of as studying their PMP, but basically the Waterfall methodology is a very structured methodology, and we'll talk soon about the kind of impact on COVID as to why it's interesting. But, it was named after that kind of sequential flow of tasks that are in a waterfall style fashion. So typically, a project manager starting a waterfall style plan will think of the first task that needs to be done on the project, and they'll put that at the top, and the last task needs to be put at the bottom. And so everything in between, they'll then typically link, often one to the other. So it's a very sequential nature to how projects are undertaken. So that perfectly suits industries where it's client driven. Time is really important. Reporting is important. The client needs to know what's taking place and when. They've got a very fixed view, really, of what the requirements and the deliverables are. So they've got quite a rigid scope. And they're often larger, more complex projects that are over a longer period of time. They've got fixed budget and resources. They'll often have a fixed price contract or fixed deliverables, and structured teams, where work's been formally assigned, where perfection is more important kind of than speed often. So a good example, of course, is, the construction industry. You can't put the roof on until the foundation's set.
Steph, that sounds nothing like the environment we find ourselves in, right?
That's right.
The environment is not set, and you got very diverse teams. And so if you could take the other side of the coin, what does Agile mean, and how does Agile method work?
Well, I like to talk about, there's two kinds of Agile: capital A Agile and smaller case A Agile. And a lot of people, when they're thinking about Agile, they know about it from the software development side. It was born out of software development teams 20 years ago. Capital A Agile is very much rooted in very clear goals for software delivery, right? So it's all about software delivery. It's about embracing change. It's about iterative software development. It's about collaborative teams and self-directed teams having more autonomy than the top-down management process of 20 years ago. And the reason it kind of took root in software development, obviously, is because the pace of software development itself was changing so dramatically in the market that software teams were screaming to project managers probably, 15 years ago, saying, we need a new way because, the market is quicker than, the patches, that we're downloading, the software requirements are changing faster than we're delivering. So that was a very natural fit for those teams. And there's been a lot of development over the years. Obviously, people can become Scrum certified. There's a lot of structure to it as well. But as Agile has taken root in software teams, we've seen what I call lowercase a Agile kind of growing in organizations from the leadership on down. And I think that's born out of Agile being also really important for innovation. So it's hard to innovate in a classic project management waterfall mindset when you have 2-year, 3-year long planned projects, and it's fixed and it's set, and you're not touching it. Well, how often are you talking to customers? How much feedback loop are you having? So Agile, brings in those feedback loops, the on the ground, both software delivery as well as strategic delivery for other kinds of projects, right? And make sure that your empathy for the user is being woven in at every step. So you have shorter development timeframes, iterative sprints, and you work with that customer feedback loop so that you make sure you're not behind, so that you can innovate in the market, because your competitor will go ahead and innovate while you're still planning. So I think a lot of business leaders started to say, ooh, that sounds interesting. They're certainly not, running capital A Agile in the formal way, but a lot of businesses have started to adopt Agile processes, collaboration, cross-functional teams. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that, right now in the market with COVID, because it's enabling different teams to kind of collaborate through software independently. And then, they're having to feed that into the strategic direction of the company. And a lot of different departments, just real quick, also use different levels of Agile, right? So software teams were pretty rooted in capital A Agile, but the marketing team or the strategy group or the leadership team might use a smaller version of that and adopt some of it, but still need some of the core planning and time and date-driven pieces that a waterfall project might entail. For example, you can't launch software, with my background in launching projects, without a date. I mean, the marketing team needs to know when that's going live. So that's why there's a lot of discussion around the sort of hybrid use cases that we're seeing.
So I appreciated Jason's comment about construction industry. You can't put the roof on until you build the foundation, and waterfall makes sense to me that way. Steph, can you give us an example of, and you mentioned software development, give us an example of, where Agile is really a good fit, or an example of, folks that are using an example of Agile. So in a software development environment, are you talking about somebody's developing the front end while somebody else develops the back end database in parallel, and somehow they bring that interface to the back end? Is that kind of at the same time?
I think in software development, you're more batching up work in sprints pretty fundamentally across the industry today. I mean, I would imagine we'd be pretty hard pressed to find a waterfall software development team today. As Jason mentioned, though, that's different from infrastructure rollouts or IT, projects that for telephony, for example, across, multiple campuses of a university, you'd need to have a more, and software is involved in that. But even still, we see a lot of software teams developing in these 2-week sprints, shorter chunks of work, and you might batch those up into a release, but the goal is shorter releases, smaller delivery packages, so that the work is happening more iteratively and more quickly, right? Again, the idea being quicker to market means more room for innovation. In other teams, though, you can see something like in a marketing team, you might have Agile marketing, right? So Agile marketing would be, let's have daily stand-ups. Let's have our test-driven marketing campaigns driven in kind of sprints, so that we might have a 2-week sprint for a particular campaign that we're A/B testing. And so that speed for a marketing team is also really important. They might, however, have the big launch campaign for that new product release, planned out maybe with a milestone-driven waterfall plan or a product roadmap or a project management roadmap. So,
Jason,
so there's kind of a way to blend those two together.
I was going to say, it sounds like if one is, Jason, a project management kind of mindset, set of practices. I appreciated Steph's comment about a capital A or a small a. The other one sounds like likewise a process or a path. Can you describe, and are you seeing hybrids of this come together where there's maybe a waterfall structure, framework, construct, but we're doing small, more agile sprints in between those?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, I typed in Agile project management and I never found a single post online in Google. It was incredible. And, Gartner have started picking it up. PMI now, I even looked today, I've got a number of white papers on hybrid project management. And it was a theoretical topic, I think, until recently. But with COVID, what's happened is, or what we're seeing is, these waterfall style guys are typically in these larger projects, but because of COVID, they're being broken down into smaller initiatives, which need to be delivered faster because they've got a route to market suddenly is really important because of COVID. They've got to get that value back quickly, but they're struggling to move into the agile world. And a lot of project managers around the world think that there are only two approaches. You've got structured waterfall and you've got uppercase agile. And so the waterfall guys go, right, let's try agile. And then the first problem that they have is they try and take their structured plans and then they try and, create sprints off them. And they just try and move, 100% of their practices over to agile. Now, interestingly, agile is not the be all and end all. We also are seeing a big problem in the market because a lot of companies are now work from home. When you're working from home, as I kind of said earlier, you need more structure, you need more planning, you've got to get that efficiency back. And the best way to do that is to actually have dates and timeframes and some scope, and and when you start doing that, well, you need to plan it. Well, so some of these agile teams are now starting to go, well, let's just swap over to waterfall. But then the teams start complaining when they have daily stand-ups instead of having scrums and sprints. So there's a lot of momentum now that's really being pushed into this hybrid concept, and I can talk about what that is if that helps.
It does, and part of me says, both ends are having personality identity crisis, right?
Yeah, so, totally. Yeah,
the big corporations want to be startups. The startups want to be big companies. And
yeah.
It's like, and joking aside, I had a conversation with an executive earlier this week, and I said something like, "You're trying to run this business in 2020 with a 1950s business model."
Yeah,
right? It just doesn't fit based on. So, is there? And Steph, I'd welcome your thoughts on this. Is there an opportunity for, if waterfall almost like is on one end and agile is the other end, almost like this sliding scale based on the context of the problems we're trying to solve, and Jason, you're exactly right. I talked to a CFO a couple of weeks ago. I think in February they had 22 projects on the executive's radar. I talked to him, about a week or so ago. They've got 4. Yeah. So they took a defensive posture. Mm-hmm. They put pause on a whole bunch of initiatives. Our conversation, interestingly enough, was, I don't know of an organization that can cut its way to growth, right? Yep. And as more executives believe that COVID is going to be less of a beginning, middle, and an end, and more of something we're just going to have to live with some period of time, I think the more astute ones are thinking, okay, where are those prudent investments we can make? Not like peanut butter, spread it all over, but really pick 1 or 2 or 3 projects, initiatives that we bet on that are really going to bolster our success after this. So, Steph, is there a lever? Is there again, based on kind of moving which side, based on the project I'm trying to kind of get out the door?
Yeah, I think exactly that. It's what is the project that you're trying to get out the door? Who are the teams that you're trying to work with, right, to get out the door? And what are the goals of the project, right? So there are a lot of principles of Agile that don't necessarily have to do always with delivery, right? So there's principles of Agile which have to do with self-directed teams, multidisciplinary teams, right? The collaboration that you can get when you bring, everybody in to get input in the business. So to your point, not having a 1950s top-down model, but a ground-up model, that's core to Agile principles, right? So you can certainly have all that, and you can also take to heart some of the, pieces of Agile that start to lean towards estimation, which is a traditional project management function. You can, instead of getting down to the hours, which can be time consuming to interview each team member, as Jason said, what are you working on? How long is that going to take? Typing that in, repeat. You can have people do more of the Agile estimation process, boulders, pebbles, rocks. Can you give me, a finger in the air, estimate, and get a little bit faster to delivery. So you can take some of the principles of Agile. Certainly the collaboration with Agile is going to be essential. That's how everyone is having to communicate today, right? Yes, people are siloed in their home, but build those teams within your, collaboration platform, make sure those teams are talking, make sure the ideas are coming up from those teams, make sure that those teams are kind of bought in, all in the same place. You have that visibility for what everybody's working on, and making sure that those principles of Agile can take root while you might have some major milestones of delivery and some projects that are very specifically targeted to key dates.
Jason, I'm never afraid of what I don't know. I'm always afraid of what I don't know.
Yeah, and the problem is you don't know it. So
can you think of some potential blind spots, some potential pitfalls of Waterfall that could get project managers, particularly in this kind of still uncertain, still short kind of timeline horizon world we're living in trouble? So what are some of the, and real quickly, I was having a conversation with an executive around coaching, and it came down to some of our fundamental strengths can be a blind spot if we let them, if we do too much of that, right?
Yeah.
So talk about that. What are some potential blind spots or shortcomings of Waterfall that could get project managers in trouble in this COVID world?
Well, the first one, which is the biggest and probably what I suffered from, in my entire project management career, is just scope management. And it's both my strength and my weakness. So if you're a waterfall style guy, then, you define the scope and requirements up front, and then you lock it. It's rigid, it's fixed, and then you deliver to that, and you come hell or high water, you deliver that on time and quality, under budget, etc. You've got very strict parameters. But the big issue in this day and age is that things need to be more flexible. That businesses, in those days, businesses didn't change. The business change horizon was a lot longer, right? I could run a good example would be a rollout of a decision support system. My very first project was for New Zealand's largest bank. So we probably spent like 2 months defining the requirements and then about a year rolling that out. So the dashboards that they finally saw after a year were the same dashboards that we interviewed them from, a year before. That's not going to work in this day and age, right? So
changing weekly.
Yeah, exactly. So the biggest problem, unless you're in, construction is probably the most rigid and engineering. But outside of that, things need to be, businesses are changing a lot faster. And because you've got that business change, you've got, goal and objective changes, you've got scope changes as a project manager, and you've got to deal with those. And it's not dealing with them, like in the old fashioned days where you go, sorry, it's out of scope, we'll add an extra 2 weeks onto the project. It's how can we make this happen, really quickly and still achieve the overall goals? And I think as a project manager, that's what we often lose sight of. We write this Bible often up front of what it is we want to deliver, and it's often features or deliverable kind of based, but we lose sight of the key objectives. And I think as a project manager, if you always, as you're dealing with all this scope change, if you tie it back to those key objectives, are we really going after the same goal is the real $1 million question. If the answer is yes, then the answer is, how do we make that happen, within the time frame, that we've got assigned?
Steph, I'm going to ask you the same thing. You said, business leaders find the Agile conversation interesting. They're intrigued by it. Shorter releases, smaller packets, love all that. That speed and agility, pun intended, sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you the same question. What are some of the blind spots of the Agile approach that, could come back and bite you?
There are none. There you go, Steph.
Yeah, and Agile capital A here would say, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's that there can be rigidity in Agile. That's again why I'm alluding to this capital A metaphor. And I think a lot of companies who, as Jason mentioned, who tried to adopt Agile through and through, just really rigorously to the manifesto, to the letter, found troubles with buy-in, found troubles with teams that actually had to deliver, on deadlines because they just have different kind of work. Capital projects in an organization, for example, or construction engineering, what do you mean? We want all of us to go to Agile? So I think there was not a lot of nimbleness, which ironically belied the spirit of Agile, right? Agile is all about nimbleness, ear to the ground, in touch with what your customers are, adaptability to change. And I think that change adaptation, which was born out of what Jason was talking about with that waterfall project management, is what we're living in right now. I mean, we're all living with this crazy level of change, day to day. We really don't know, what 2 months or 3 months or 6 months is going to look like. So Agile is something that we can adopt to, be nimble, to keep the buy-in, to get ear on the ground of the customers. What are your customers needing today? But if you try to retain its rigidity, it has to be a scrum. It has to be 2 sprints. We can never tell the leadership when we're going to deliver. You're going to run into problems. Those are some of those loopholes. You have to have buy-in.
Actually, David,
and usually you do that. What's that?
Yeah. I was going to say, we actually went through, to Steph's point, this same transition internally, right? So, we've got around 50 people in the company. We've got a marketing team, software development team. How we delivered product before was probably more waterfall style based. We'd write a big spec up front and then we'd deliver it, and I'd say, right, what's the delivery date? It'd all be estimated, and it's like, this is 8 weeks, great. In 8 weeks, we're going to have that. Yep. Fantastic. That's the value prop. Go for it. What's going to cost? Cool. Thumbs up. But then we tried to move to Agile. And my first question when we, rolled out this new Agile methodology was, cool, so what is it that's going to be delivered in 8 weeks? or this scope of work, when is it going to be delivered? And the answer was, well, we're not quite sure. And why is that? Well, we haven't done any formal detailed planning because you don't necessarily do that in Agile. But sure, so how many resources is it going to consume? Well, we don't really know. But the good news is you're going to get something faster than what you had before, right? So then we ended up flipping back to this more hybrid methodology where we do scope things a little bit more formally up front, but particularly in terms of, what is it we're wanting to achieve, and within what time frame, and how many resources, and et cetera, and what are the major high level functions we're going to build, et cetera. But then the minute that kind of first level of planning is complete and we've got some kind of overall dates, we're running scrums and sprints, and we do have a lot of flexibility in the delivery. And halfway through, our requirements will change. And the business objectives might change, but we can still deliver solid value prop really quickly.
I am fascinated by the responsiveness that I perceive is in the Agile approach. Yet I'm reminded of the fact that I saw a Steve Jobs interview who, they really challenged him was between, we've got a phone, we've got laptops, do we really need a tablet?
Yeah.
Right? They're almost like he created a sector. And in the first version of the iPad, they actually had a camera ready, but they held back on it. The apps weren't available. More importantly, he said something really interesting that resonated, which is the customers don't often know. They may know what they want, but not what they need.
Yeah.
The difference is your consultative approach. The difference is you're asking enough intelligent questions to figure out not just what they're trying to do, but why they're doing it.
Yep.
What happens in an Agile or a hybrid environment? Jason, you said it. Our requirements change in the middle, right? And I'm thinking that internal customer, that internal department that wanted something from our team suddenly wants to pivot based on what's happening in their market.
Yep.
The Agile team pivots and then they change their mind. So how do you keep this from becoming this constant zigzag and a crisis in the making?
Well, the key for us really is it's got to come from the customer. And that customer being a solid group of customers who have very clear requirements that suit the industry at the moment, and it's a timely thing that we need to build. But So if there's internal squabbling, and there usually is, I saw a whole new interface design this morning. Stephanie and another lady who's in our product team, the three of us got on a call. We all have totally different views. Who's right? Well, the answer is customers and data, and so we can user test that. But a really good example is COVID come around. And suddenly, Microsoft Teams, that wasn't really that heavily used before for making calls, people were using Slack or Skype, suddenly just took off. And I've got one of my neighbors here at Dell, they're rolling it out. And and it's not for task and project management, but it's for calls and meetings. And suddenly, our competitors are building call and meeting features. Now, that was never on the roadmap. We never wanted to compete in that space, but now we're having to think, shucks, it's a work from home model. It's a brand new requirement. It's right bang smack in the middle of some of our major delivery phases. How do we handle this? Now that requirement isn't going to go away. So, we've had to include it in our roadmap, and we'll end up having to build those features. But it's really all about the customer. But of course, it's easier for us because we've got close to 40,000 customers. So we can take a mass demand. But shucks, if you're a I don't know, I'll pick on construction, and you've got a client who happens to be, one guy building a big residential, apartment complex, and he's changing his mind halfway through. Well, that gets a lot harder.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you brought up your customers. Can you share how projects are managed on projectmanager.com? And are you also incorporating a hybrid approach that I can pick either path or a combination of to kind of run my project through?
Yeah, Steph, do you want to cover it, or I can? Either way.
Go ahead, Jason. Go ahead.
Yeah, so basically, about 5 or 6 years ago, I interviewed customers extensively. So we took our top 100 customers and I spent about 300 hours with them. And what I noticed was that there was this big change in the market, that you take a team and within a team, people work different ways. So you've got a classic, let's take an IT team as an example. There's the IT director, they're not working that efficiently, so he goes to the PMP person, look, go out and find us a tool. PMP person loves Gantt charts because they're managing more formal tools. It's how they were trained. They type in, Gantt chart in Google, they find someone like us, come along, they show the manager, look, it's got these dashboards, manager's happy, PMP person's happy, rest of the team are gutted. Ugh. Do I really have to use a Gantt chart? Oh my gosh. And so we noticed that what was happening was there was a lot of churn in the marketplace. Every product out there was just being built for one particular use case. And at that time, we were Gantt chart centric. So we would have suited those two people, and the rest of the team would have been unhappy and forced to use that way of working. So what we built was really the world's first multi-view product. And what I mean by that is someone can come in and work on a task list like Asana, a Kanban board like Trello. There'll be a sheet view soon like Smartsheet. There's a Gantt view like Microsoft Project. They're all working on the same project, the same data at the same time. And so that's where the whole software industry has really moved, is this kind of multiple use case. And now, as a person looking for, to buy tools, you don't have to choose, which particular way of working do the entire team have to work. Everyone can work the way that they like. I was always a waterfall style guy. The biggest used feature that I use in our software is a Kanban board. Now, ironically, Steph is an agile person, and some of the projects that she's had to manage, she's had to create Gantt charts for them.
I'm telling you, the identity crisis in this
community.
Could you please just pick one and go on? Hey, I want to be agile. Hey, tomorrow, please don't label me. I'm a waterfall guy. Yeah. That's fabulous. That's great. Steph, anything else to add in terms of how projects are run to really succeed in this environment?
Yeah, well, I think as Jason mentioned, you can collaborate with teams when you have a shared view of what everybody's working on, right? So that is why, obviously, in this COVID era, the next couple of years, maybe even longer. I mean, a lot of businesses, Facebook and Google, are potentially saying we're going to be working from home forever for those employees. So, this is possibly reality for, forever. So, having that shared view is really important, but also having that flexibility of those views. So in the Kanban board, for example, you prioritize the lanes of a Kanban board differently than you would a Gantt chart, right? So the Gantt chart is talking about milestones, phases, it's broken down, but you can be over there and have that view, but then have this totally the same task in a Kanban board, but you're prioritizing it by the phases of delivery for the work. And that kind of flexible view allows different teams to manage, collaborate with each other in that cross-functional way, so that then the ideas can be shared. When you work in a siloed way, with one team using, just Slack over here and another team using Trello over here, that there's no visibility, right? So I think that's where the power of these kinds of tools is really helping teams working from home, but also in those two different ways, quite effectively. You can literally manage an Agile project and a Waterfall project, the same project, in two different ways. So that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing people pretty excited about that.
Jason, I want to build on Steph's comment. I read a really interesting McKinsey report that says something like 46% of certainly the U.S. workforce will not need to come back to a physical office. So in extrapolating that idea forward, if you and I, or the three of us, were to visit 5 years from now, 10 years from now, where do you see the methodology going? Where do you see, and have you thought any about, this hybrid model on steroids, right? So, and by the way, we're also not tethered to our desks as much, and we're now much more mobile, and we're using, we're attached. This thing is physically attached to me at my hip, and and I can do also. Samsung is one of my clients, and I've seen them. It's Apple Watch, the same thing. We do a lot more with wearables, and they're a heck of a lot more capable than they were a few years ago. So talk about, where do you see the methodology going?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So if we talk about the past and then the future, so in the past, we started with Henry Gantt and the world's first Gantt chart, and so we ended up with a traditional waterfall style approach for many, many years. Then the market evolved and Agile come around. And so a lot of tools like Jira, ticket management kind of based tools really took off. So then we ended up with one of my best friends was a senior manager at Reuters, managing this huge team. They made that transition, but had big problems with delivery dates and understanding, when planned work is going to get done. So then you ended up with having this kind of movement to hybrid projects. Right. So, and that's where, they're planned up front, waterfall style, but they're kind of executed Agile style. Yeah. So, and that's where we are at the moment, and that's really being kicked off by COVID. It's really fueled it. So that's hybrid projects. Now, underneath it, you actually have hybrid teams, and I think this is a realization that the market is only just starting to come up with. So a hybrid team is actually where within one team they'd like to be able to execute all different styles of methodology, right, for different kinds of projects. So software development might be a good example where they might have 3 projects. The first one might be relatively small. They want to use lowercase Agile, no set delivery date for it. It's operational work, but it's all got to be batched up. The second is uppercase Agile, where it's a bit more formal and they might have to have sprints for it. And then the third is that it might be a package-based rollout, and therefore they've got to use Waterfall for that. Now that's a hybrid team. That team, they've got different people within that team running different kinds of projects. Where the market is going to really quickly, and it's really hard to, years ago, you could foresee kind of where the market was going 5 years ahead. Because of COVID, the most that we can kind of predict is sort of 9 to 12 months ahead. And anyone who says that they can predict past of that, is probably going to be wrong. So now we have this third evolution, which is a hybrid way of working. So that's not necessarily for a hybrid project or a hybrid team. It's one person doing hybrid work. So a simple example is me in our software. I've got a certain number of tasks that need to be created. I might not use a project for that. Another set, I might create a waterfall style project for it. Another set, I might use a Kanban board style for it. And another set, I might just use a simple task list. So team members individually in 9 months plus will be working in a hybrid style of working. And I think the tools now have adapted to allow them to be able to do that. And then to your point, some of those tasks, like, I don't know, a project these days is just work getting done. So, people type in project management software, if they've got a gardening project that's on a Post-it note, it's on their wall, and they're doing it with their wife in the weekend. Now, clearly you're not going to use a Gantt chart for that, but that's where your Apple Watch will kick in and it'll be like, oh, hey, it's 10 o'clock, time to start on the weeds. but that same person that's typing in project management software is also expecting software to be able to manage a big rollout. So software is going to have to scale right from that gardening project to that big package-based rollout. And I think the days of just going to enterprise software for the upper end and Trello for the bottom end, those are over. People expect it to do everything in the middle.
Talking about people expecting things to go in the middle, Steph, is AI or blockchain on your radar? And if so, where do you see the applications of those types of technologies in kind of guiding a project, initiative, a team through this process?
Yeah, I mean, I think people expect software to be magical, right? And in a lot of ways it still is, right? Here we are, we're talking, through the air, through space, having this conversation, right? And AI is that sort of promise of the next layer of magic, right? It's the software doing something that the person, maybe put in some data into the software, but the software is feeding back predictive information. So you see that in your Google Maps, they'll say, you typically go to work at this time. A lot of us probably, once we stopped commuting, we're still getting alerts on our phone, like, Stephanie, isn't it time to get on the car? Your commute is coming. So
my commute is 6 seconds, okay? From the bedroom to the office.
Yeah, really cut down. And Google hasn't caught up yet with that commute time. So that kind of predictive information is where a lot of AI is going. I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities with projects. I think right now with COVID, it's really hard to really leverage that kind of technology, because let's say, for example, you wanted to have a predictive algorithm that said, you use these same kind of projects for every one of your clients. Okay, great. So we can then predict that at this time, in your last 4 projects, you were this far ahead or this far behind. That's really exciting, and it's something that we've thought about. Give me a clue of what I might be behind on, as opposed to what I'm already behind on, because the software is telling you. So that next step of predictability is really cool. But with COVID, well, everybody's projects, like you just mentioned, 22 down to 4, the data sets are changed. Where can we reasonably predict human behavior? And that's the big challenge with AI broadly. So when a lot of times people talk about AI, it's often, we think of Watson, we think of the Weather Channel powered by Watson. We know that there's some, cross-functional data sets that are providing information to the customer kind of unprompted. So we're looking at some of those exciting opportunities at Project Manager, but with COVID, it's, it's a little challenging. You have to think about all those competing realities in the environment.
So Jason, the first time I heard about you and projectmanager.com was through Jennifer and all those videos you guys did together for a number of years. And I think it was really successful and a ton of fun from both sides. Question of you is, because of COVID and the whole waterfall, agile, hybrid conversations we've had, what are some of the capabilities? What are some of the competencies that you believe project managers really need to prioritize in embracing, in immersing themselves in really learning and making more of a proactive priority to embrace?
Yep, sure. Well, the first thing is, in terms of knowledge, I would highly encourage anyone listening to this to learn about hybrid project management. There's not a huge amount online, but there are 3 or 4 really good papers that have been written, and PMI have also published some content. The reason why is that it'd be great to broaden people's awareness of the different ways of working, and that you have some people listening to this that are purely the uppercase agile guys, but they're under pressure to produce reports and deliver things on time, and those are kind of waterfall style traits.
What is this report?
Yeah. Are we ahead or are we behind? That person gets a slap. And then you've got the waterfall guys that are under pressure to deliver faster, and that's where more of an agile, hybrid rather style method will really help. So I'd encourage a lot of learning there. We will be producing content over the next 3 to 6 months on that, and it would be nice if I think PMI in time will come out with a certification that is specific to hybrid project management. But in terms of real life practical day-to-day project management, projects are made up of people. Yes, you've got all these other factors, time and assets and materials and everything else that are the million levers that they've got to manage, but really just boosting people management and leadership skills really are the number one thing that a project manager needs to be really focused on at this time. The tricky part as a project manager is, well, the more traditional project managers don't like change. And it's because a change is a change to scope, to budget, to resourcing. We really we shy away from that. And I think in this high change environment with COVID, it's a mindset. It's got to be supported and adopted. And the first thing for that kind of mindset is to learn about hybrid. The next thing is to think about how team members can be inspired and motivated to adopt change, and therefore find that kind of medium ground between waterfall and agile.
Yeah, I'm writing in the next book called Curve Benders, the fundamental difference between simple, complicated, and complex.
Yep.
And the need to simple catalyst for change happens all around us. We do it almost like second nature, right? I need a bigger house. I need a bigger car. I need to move somewhere for a better job. When it gets to complicated and complex, that's when your relationships, and that's where, multitude of, as you said, learning, but also equally valuable, unlearning and relearning becomes incredibly
that's
valuable,
right?
Yep. And really important. So I want to give you guys the final word. Steph, I'm going to start with you. Give our audience one, no pressure or anything, but one really strong nugget of advice, some earth-shattering, go think about, go do, take away from the session. Give us one.
Yeah, I think, the word that's just thundering around my brain is innovation, right? Innovation is why we talk about Agile in the first place. It's why business leaders and project managers, transition to Agile. It's not just delivery. It's not just speed. It's innovation. And that can be really challenging in a time like this, right? This is a time of such transition, but it's also a time of, new energy, new ideas, and when, in order to innovate, you need to be harvesting those ideas from everyone on the team, from everywhere, from the end user, from your customers, right? And so if you're curious and questioning and open-minded in this time, which is hard, it's a pretty heavy time. But if you think about that, there's always possibility, and that with all this change comes often innovation. I think there's really a lot of exciting value to be had out of sort of the Agile processes, or at least the spirit of Agile underneath the process part of Agile. So I really think that, innovation is something that seems magical. It's this thing that only Steve Jobs does, right? And he must have some magical gift. But innovation at a smaller level is responsiveness to customers and openness to ideas. And it surprises you when it happens, right? And a lot of project managers may not be personally responsible for innovation themselves, but they can make sure that they're harvesting the input from the team to, support the leaders or the product folks towards those opportunities for innovation.
Love it. Jason, I don't want to put you on the spot, but your VP just set the bar.
I know. I was thinking, how do I beat that?
Now I know why you invited her on this session. She just set the bar pretty high.
We could just finish the session there.
No. You're getting with that easy.
Nice try.
Right. So your turn. Right.
Okay.
Let's see. Yeah. I think she just did a mic drop, but let's just see how you elevate that.
That's a pretty darn good answer. I guess if Steph's going to talk about innovation, I'd like to talk just briefly about how you apply innovation. And so I've got a bit of a unique methodology to running businesses and projects and almost life. It goes like this. It's a 3-phase approach. Normally, innovation, you have ideas and all the rest, and then you create strategy is that first step, right? And then the second step for most people is execution. I've got this kind of middle step, which is testing. And so with COVID and everything we do in projectmanager.com, people innovate, they come up with great ideas, they'll come up with some kind of plan, like we're going to go and, to coin the kind of Texas phrase, we're going to conquer this hill, and this is how we're going to do it, people, time, and everything. And then they just straight into execution. And I think with COVID particularly, it's really important to test out those ideas as early as possible and to use data to support the decision as to whether or not you execute. And so having that kind of check mark, that milestone prior to execution, I think is just super important. So we apply that as a methodology to everything we do in projectmanager.com, whether it's a marketing idea or a software release or a customer gives feedback. A recent one was, a customer said the print function wasn't so great. So great, we come up with a whole new plan for printing. Right now, let's test it. So, we test it with screenshots and mock-ups and everything else first. And then the feedback's really good. Right now, let's go ahead and execute.
So, that's the way you go out on a high, right? So testing becomes critical. Joking aside, for our audience, I want to thank you've been listening to Jason Westland and Stephanie Ray from projectmanager.com. Thank you guys for your insights, for your ideas, for a fun session. And Jennifer and I appreciate your contribution to this. So thanks very much.